You're listening to Back Pew Convos.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Sal. And this is the podcast God wants you to listen to.
So if you want to remain in God's will, have a sit down.
Grab a beverage of your choice.
And have a listen.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think so. So something I just remembered something whenever you said that. I know that I remember Chris Green saying something about our memories, and he used it as an example of what I mean when I talk about, like, because our memories are tricky. Our memories, we don't always remember things exactly how they were.
Actually, more often than not, we don't, is what most studies show.
Yeah. And a lot of times we remember things. So I think what the point that he was trying to make is, like, like whenever I've talked about God not being done with your past and all of that, how, like, God is able to alter those things. Like, in a sense, we kind of already do that with our own memories.
Yeah.
Like we, our memory, our consciousness is aware of a certain understanding of history that from our actual lived experience before is different, but it is the reality as we remember it.
Right.
So, like, even that is like a sort of, it's not saying everything that needs to be said about it, but it is a sort of an example, a real life example that we can look to say, like, we, in a sense, we kind of are already doing that.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting thing to think about, how we don't remember things accurately, and how it's actually scary as hell to think if you were ever to be on a jury of your peers.
Right.
The eyewitness account, knowing that most of the time people's memories aren't right.
Yeah. Also, like, even thinking, like, because if that is true, which, I mean, I think it is true, then, like, even trying to put a whole lot of stock into something historical makes it that much harder to do. But when I say stock, I really mean trying to say this definitely did or didn't happen historically. But that doesn't necessarily mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that perhaps if God is if God is not bound by time and space and is able to change the past in a way that makes it what it always should have been, then maybe the whole claims of trying to make sense of what did and didn't happen historically within the scriptures, maybe that's even sort of a bit of a fool's errand to even worry about trying to prove or disprove
Right.
historically what did and didn't happen in the scriptures.
Yeah, I agree. I for sure agree. I don't put a whole lot of historical stock into it, to be honest with you. I mean,
well, some people will, and
Right.
on both sides of it. Some people, like the Christian apologists, will try to prove the historicity of all of the things in Scripture, and try to harmonize things that maybe aren't supposed to be. But then you have also, from the opposite perspective, you have, like, atheists that will try to prove historically that, like, Jesus isn't God, or that Jesus is, some people would go so far as to try to prove that Jesus didn't even exist.
Right.
Trying to prove, or
Which is a very minority position, but does exist.
Yeah. And then, like, trying to prove whether he did or didn't rise from the dead historically, like, if that's something that we could prove historically. Like, there's just so many things that, like, on both ends of the spectrum, whether you're full-blown atheist and you're an apologetic for your own atheism, or if you're a Christian apologist, like that's where like the apologetics kind of loses me, is in that need for certainty. But I do take a different approach to it. It's not that because I do hold scripture to be really authoritative. And actually something like what I'm talking about helps me hold the scriptures to be authoritative, really, in one sense. But
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of that, just trying to, break that down a little bit, a lot of that actually factored into my story of deconstruction in the first place, right? Like, I didn't know what to do with these scriptures. I was taught that if they weren't literally true, you just, if even one iota of them can't be trusted, then you have to throw the whole thing away. You can't trust any of it. You know what I mean? So then when you're faced with
right,
those contradictions, you've got one of two options. You can go down that road of cognitive dissonance, right? Bury your head in the sand and close my eyes and plug my ears and say, no, 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 I can't see that. Like, and try to
right,
ignore the contradictions and the inconsistencies and the tensions that appear within the text. Or you can, do what you're talking about, where you try to be our best, knowing that we are always, everybody approaches the things biased, but try our best to set our biases aside and actually take them for what they are and wrestle with that and try to work it out,
yeah. We came in hot and heavy on this one.
Yeah, we kind of did. I didn't even know when we started recording, so
Yeah. Well,
we've already been going for an hour
Yeah,
before we even started recording. So
yeah, I really wish that all of that had been recorded, honestly.
yeah, because that was probably the best takes I've got.
It's just gonna be garbage from
It's
here
all
on
going to
out.
go downhill from here.
Yeah, I was actually hoping that we could get a long one in today and then split it in two, so that we wouldn't have to try to get another episode in this week, just because it's trying to figure out when to do it's gonna be hard. But I don't know. I think we've probably already said all the things,
Yeah.
and we haven't even started recording before we started recording.
It's not even 6 yet. The night is young.
I suppose.
I
am not.
Are you still on overtime?
No, I'm not at the moment, so it's not as bad.
There we go. Good.
It's not as bad.
That's what I like to hear.
I would still like to be home at a decent hour, but because even though I'm not on overtime, it's only an hour. Like when I go on overtime, I'm only there an hour early, so like I'm still just normally I get up pretty early. So like I'm usually up by like 4:45 or so, which if you're trying to get 7 to 8 hours, then you need to go to bed at like 8.
Yeah, I know.
9.
My alarm's set for 4 a.m. every day, so I'm with you.
Yeah. But yeah. It'll be fine. It's gonna be fine.
Be fine.
Well, I don't know. We talked about talking about the role of the authority of Scripture.
Authority. You will respect my authority.
But I don't know. Do you want to just? I mean, do we want to kind of rehash the discussion we had upstairs, or do we want to just not let anyone know what preceded the conversation that we're having right now?
Do we really want to cast our pearls before swine?
Hey, we got comments.
Yep, we did.
We finally got comments on some of our videos.
Hallelujah.
Well, on one for sure. I didn't see any comments on any of the other ones. They weren't particularly positive comments. But hey, it is what it is.
Any publicity is good publicity.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw them.
Yeah. But hey, we got comments.
The funny thing is on those comments, and I don't even have them pulled up. I don't remember what they were, but to your point, they seemed to be sort of a negative bent, but like I didn't necessarily even disagree with what the guy said to begin with. I felt like it kind of went downhill, but
right.
Russia. I don't know. It was a guy. Maybe it was a girl. I used a gendered language there.
Oh no! How dare you? Yeah, I don't know.
But
there was yeah, I don't know. We don't have to talk about it. It is what it is. I agree with what you're saying. Initially the critiques were I'm like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. But
yeah,
we I mean both of us spent a lot of time sort of. I mean, I would say for myself I was agnostic at best. And then depending on the day, I would have said I was an atheist.
yeah,
And that's stayed in that space for years. So, it's not like we haven't
right,
been down that road before,
right.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not worried about that. I don't care what people think about me.
yeah.
And that part of the whole point of this this content that we do, the show is me and you
Right.
working out our own salvation with fear and trembling. It's working out this stuff. I don't know where that's going
Right.
to end up for me. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I even brought it up is just because I thought it was cool. We got some comments finally.
Yeah, for sure.
Because the comments actually help us get more views when people like and comment.
So if you hate us, please comment and let us know that you hate us. Call me every dirty, rotten name in the book.
Yeah, it's fine.
Fine with me. I don't care.
Yeah.
But
I was just trying to think of things that were maybe worth bringing up.
there's a new pope.
There is a new pope.
And
Yeah,
it wasn't Trump.
it's not Trump. We talked about the possibility of it being Trump, and it wasn't.
It was
Hey,
not.
what if, because this pope is American,
Yeah.
what if it turned out that somehow they're pulling some sort of like Scooby-Doo trick on us, and it's Trump in a mask?
I don't think he's smart enough to figure that out, to be honest.
Okay, fair enough. I don't know. For some reason, I was like, whenever there was even talk of people like thinking, oh, he might be the Pope, I was like, I wonder if he's so diabolical, he could figure out a way to do this. Could he find a way to make himself Pope?
Diabolical, yes. Intelligent, not even close.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
What if?
I don't know. The funny thing is, neither one of us are Catholic. I kind of always do follow the Pope thing because I think it's kind of interesting, how they go about it and elect. That's the right word, right? The conclave convenes and elects
Think so.
Pope. I think the whole thing's kind of interesting. It's pretty interesting to see who gets voted in and sort of what name they take, right? Because the name that they take is supposed to represent, like the homage to the lineage,
Right.
that they want to follow. And it's kind of funny seeing the reactions and how different people, react to it. Like I know that this Pope Leo, as he's being referred to, I believe his name was Roberto,
Roberto?
but he's going by Leo. I know that some of the people weren't real happy about that selection because he seems to emphasize social justice, which he had made some comments on social media that sort of emphasized social justice, and then he chose the name Leo, which is again supposed to pay homage to that lineage of Leo, who was in favor of workers and lower class, social justice essentially. So it's sort of him making a statement that that's what he stands for. One of the first things that he in his first address, after being named Pope, was a call to end all wars. And I know that he's also already said some stuff about climate change. So obviously, some people aren't very happy about some of the things that he's already seeming to stand for.
He's a woke Pope.
Yeah, he's woke. So. But
fracking liberal.
Yeah. So, which even not being a Catholic, I still follow that stuff because regardless of whether I'm Catholic or not, the guy does carry some weight. Quite a bit of it, actually.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's got some influence. What he says matters.
Right, yeah.
And so, even not being Catholic, it's still something I think is worth paying attention to.
Yeah. I just don't I don't get on social media at all, and like I don't watch the news or anything. Like I don't really have any way to, I mean, unless I just go out of my way to look it up.
Yeah.
Then I don't really know anything that's going on. So I haven't even heard. I had heard that there was some controversy, like some people weren't happy about it, but I didn't know why.
Yeah.
So
From what I can gather, that's it. They're afraid he's
Mm.
woke.
yeah. And that is interesting. That would be an interesting thing. Like if you were Catholic, that would be an interesting thing to have to deal with, to have to navigate. What you think about the Pope, and then like what are you going to say about it and not say about it, and
Right. How does
all that
that
kind of
fit,
stuff.
how does it fit into everything,
Yeah.
does it change your worldview or shape it? Or if not, how do you deal with that tension between this person who's supposed to be a figurehead of authority,
Right.
right? And then talking about authority, right? Just like
Yeah.
the scriptures have authority, like that's part of what they give authority in their tradition, you know what I mean? So then how do you, if you don't respect that authority, what does that do to your faith,
Right. Yeah.
within your specific tradition?
Right.
I don't know. I don't have to worry about that because I don't have a tradition.
Yeah. I mean, Christianity, just in general, I would say is the tradition that when I talk about tradition, that's what I mean. It's just the whole history of the Christian tradition, whether that be Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, whatever it is, just the whole history of it and the different voices throughout the centuries, millennia,
The millennia.
which does uh, I do put a lot of weight into that. Um, insofar as like I think that we need to hear those voices out and hear the arguments, hear the disagreements between everyone. I think that those are important before we move forward. I think before the church moves forward, it needs to at least be aware on some level, and not that you're going to read every church father and you're going to research every single council. I mean, you could do that, and you could devote your entire life to that and do that, but I think you do need to have some sort of level of understanding of the how things evolved in the church. And I haven't devoted enough time to that myself, but I know a
We
little bit.
we sort of got the short end of the stick on that without having not being a part of a tradition, right? Because
Yeah.
that's something that I mean, we've talked about that before. There are perks to not having when I say not, I kind of say not having a tradition as a joke, but it's because we're non-denominational, so we don't even have a denominational tradition or whatever. You know what I mean? So like, but because of that, we do miss some of that. Some of the tradition of our
Yeah.
strand of Christianity, even that would sort of keep you reading and studying some of your the people that have influenced that particular tradition. But we don't, pretty much any sort of church father or anything like that we have to do on our own.
Right.
I've only done it through my studies at Global Grace. That's it.
Yeah. I've read some on my own, and I've listened to and read people that are familiar with that tradition and what they're saying about it. And I mean, I've educated myself a little bit, but I still haven't like actually sat down and read the fathers a ton on my own.
Yeah.
Just a very little bit,
Right.
just enough to get a sort of gist of what some of them are saying. And even then, it's only on like specific topics. You know what I mean? Like I've read what Gregory has to say about Gregory of Nyssa on like the Holy Spirit, and I've read like Irenaeus on certain things, but I haven't read like everything Gregory wrote or everything Irenaeus wrote.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've read Athanasius, on the Incarnation.
Yeah,
I
I
read
did
that
read that one.
twice. One of Tertullian's, I've read some of it. I have a book downloaded by Teresa of Avila,
Yeah.
but I haven't read it yet.
I really would like to see. I don't know. I don't know where to start because I would like to get into Gregory of Nyssa and read everything that he wrote, and then I'd like to read everything that's in English anyway of these guys, of Maximus. But I almost wonder if I should start somewhere else earlier in the tradition,
Yeah, I know.
like Irenaeus or something.
I know particularly with Gregory, was it Irenaeus that he was sort of in the lineage of, or was it Origen?
Well, I think that Gregory is influenced by Origen a lot, but I also think he's influenced by Irenaeus. I think he's also
Well, I think particularly what I was thinking about was in his view of universalism. I think that's Origen, right?
yes. Some would claim that Irenaeus was a universalist. I don't think that the general scholarly consensus is that he wasn't. He was like an annihilationist. But I do agree from what little bit I do know about Irenaeus's overall, like his atonement theory in particular. Like I think that his system doesn't really make a ton of sense without universalism, even if he himself didn't claim to be.
Yeah.
So that's, he's definitely a big influence on some of those folks that were universalists.
Yeah.
Irenaeus is.
One of the things I think that is maybe the coolest thing about Gregory of Nyssa that I've learned so far is that how, because most scholars, we don't know exactly when he died, but most people dated like 394, late 390s. So he was already like an outspoken proponent against slavery.
Yep.
And that was way before his time. So like he
Right.
was way ahead of the curve on that. And I think that that's just so cool that he was outspoken against that so far in the future, or in the past.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Dude was preaching. I mean, I could be wrong about this. I'm thinking this is right. Pretty sure he was preaching sermons to a mixed crowd of like he had slave and slave owners in the congregation, and he's preaching
yeah,
against slavery in the crowd. Like that's
that's the kind of preaching I'm here for. Like, I love that.
yeah.
That's awesome.
It really is interesting because he is a universalist, right? And then the same thing with Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was a universalist. And so like it's just interesting that both of these guys played a big part in, standing against slavery and then it being abolished here in America, through Abraham Lincoln like that. I really just I don't think that that's a complete coincidence. Like I really do think that having that view of universal salvation I think that if you think God can torture people for all of eternity, then it's okay for you to like make them work for you. You know what I mean? Like
Right. The old saying goes, right, that you become like the God that you worship, right? So if
Yeah.
the God that you worship is okay with torturing people,
Yeah. Yeah.
how are you going to turn out,
Right.
That's not to say that everyone that believes in that
Exactly.
is a terrible person or is around torturing, but I think that
Right.
you can see the link.
Yeah, I'm definitely not trying to make it like a simple black and white. Like if you believe in eternal conscious torment, then you're okay with slavery. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But I do think it's just an interesting correlation with those figures in history and their relationship, them being super well known for that,
It's
for
just
slavery and universalism.
it really blows my mind that this guy was alive in the late 300s, mid to late 300s, already talking about this. And this is the year 2025. And racial issues is still at the forefront of our society here in the United States of America. And like obviously slavery hasn't been legal here for
Right.
A while. But we something that we lose, I think, or at least I did. I didn't realize it until several years ago, me and Kelly took a vacation to Memphis.
Right.
And while we were there, this was one of unbelievable. This was a cool trip because it was a last second trip. We hadn't planned it. We were like, let's just go long weekend. We went to Memphis. One of the things that we did was we went to the Civil Rights Museum, which is there. It's at the Lorraine, which is where Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. on the balcony, right? You
Right,
can
yeah.
walk out there into his hotel room and still see it, like the spot, you know. And like slavery may have been abolished a long time ago, you know, in the Abraham Lincoln days. But man, that civil rights stuff happened in our parents' lifetime.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's not that far in the past.
Right, yeah.
There are people alive today who had like grandparents that were slaves.
Yeah.
You know, like it seems like it's distant past,
Right, yeah.
but it's literally right behind us.
Yeah, yeah.
And then think about how far ago Gregory was talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's a visionary, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's no wonder when you see his, this high view he has of humanity, and he has this high view of humanity because he believes that God has such a high view of humanity,
Right.
and part of that is because of this man Jesus, that and that there's a lot to say there, but yeah, like it's whenever you have such high regard for your fellow man, then I think that
You know, now that you're saying that, I think that that could be a future topic for us one day.
what's that?
It's not the humanity of Jesus, but it's the humanity of humans or the divinity of humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
The or a high view of humans, or just our view of humanity. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it, because a lot of your theology, depending on how you view it, like the whole worm theology thing, that's
Right.
that's obviously going to color how you view yourself, and if you can, and other people. So he says love your neighbor. When Jesus says love your neighbor as yourself, well, if you view yourself as
Right.
a worm, low down, dirty, nothing.
Right. Well, which I mean, not to get completely off into that topic again, you know what I mean? But that's part of some of the thoughts that I had around some of the things that I had been thinking lately and saying lately about Jesus's humanity and divinity and how that relates to ours. It's like as I was thinking through it and thinking about the whole idea of like, no, we are, but we are because of him. And, like in a way, I was thinking about that as like, man, I hear that. Isn't that almost like a churched up worm theology, though? It's like, no, we are, but not only because of this, not because we are by nature that, but because we had to be adopted in. But now you're as good as born that way. It's like, yeah, I don't know.
I guess it just depends on what we mean by because like what I mean by that is not that you're a worm,
Right.
that you're like it's not, to me it's not a worm theology with Jesus added to it. Like I don't think that the whole purpose from the very beginning for me is that the plan from the very beginning was always to unite humanity and God in this person Jesus. And so it's not that like God's ever had a view of you, or that you are like gross,
Right.
like like
Right. And I mean, I think that that's why I was saying that, I phrased it from a perspective of like, because I know it's not exactly the same, but it is sort of like the same sort of idea of like, no, you really are less than until you're made. You know what I mean? Like it is sort of a view, like that's part of what motivates me in the direction that I've gone in. Is like, no, it's because I do hold humanity to, like that high of a regard, you know what I mean? Like to where it's
yeah,
But anyway, that's not the topic today.
right.
So we don't
Well,
have
I
to go
mean,
there.
yeah, well, yeah, I guess we don't. I was just gonna. There's the only other thing I was gonna say to that about that was just like, to me, it's not any less of a high view of humanity to say that, I mean, if we agree that we don't always love our neighbor as ourselves, then all we're saying is that there's room for improvement. There's room for us to grow more into Christ likeness, to be to as long as we are sinning, I think that there is always room for us to grow. Well, I think there's always room for us to grow. Period.
I agree.
But you know what I mean? Like, unless we're just gonna take the sin out of the equation, then I would say that, like, yeah, I just mean, like, I mean the fact that we do sin, that we don't always love our neighbor as ourselves, that we don't always live the life that we could live if we lived it more faithfully. Like, that to me is what is all that I'm trying to name by becoming what he is. Yeah. That we're in process of that.
Well, no, I mean, I agree with that. I was phrasing it more from the perspective of like divinity versus humanity. You know what I mean? Like becoming divine, whatever that means. Anyway,
Well, I think that they're connected, though.
yeah,
Like,
maybe.
if if being divine means to be Christ-like, if divine means becoming like the old saying from the church, from all the church fathers, basically, like, God becomes man so that man might become God. Like, if that is the goal, then, like, I'm having a really hard time concentrating for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, all I was getting at was I don't remember if it was yesterday or today. We talked about, you asked me about being divine by nature. By
Oh, yeah,
grace,
yeah.
and that's what I was getting at. You know, and that's what I was talking about.
Well, no, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that poses, to me, that being becoming divine by grace, to me, doesn't mean that you're a worm. Like, it's to me, it's not the same
Right.
as, like, a, what we might call, like, a reformed view, or whatever. Pick a tradition, pick a person in church history who seems to say that humans are just snow-covered dung. Let's go with that one.
Right. Well, I mean, and I didn't mean to imply that it was the same, like a perfectly one for one. But all I was using it as a way of phrasing that it seems like, to me, the language around it makes it seem like, no, human beings are less than, but then we're adopted in, so now we're acceptable. We're okay. Like we were less than, but now we're not. And I don't know. I have a kind of a hard time thinking that we were ever less than. You know what I mean?
Depends on what it would depend on what we mean by less than, I guess, is what maybe I probably should have said at the very beginning of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would just depend on what we mean by that.
But anyway, that's not the topic at hand.
Yeah. I guess, I don't even know. I didn't know. For a second, I thought we had abandoned the topic, actually, and we were just going to talk about other stuff.
Oh, well, we can do that too. I know the topic that we had talked about talking about was the authority of Scripture,
Right. Which,
whatever that means.
it felt like there was probably a better segue that we just missed along the way from the beginning to here into the topic.
Maybe not.
But anyway,
We just let the Spirit lead us here, and we do whatever He says. And is the Spirit a He?
that's exactly what I was getting ready to say. Maybe not.
Depends on how you define gender.
Some folks would say that the Spirit is a lady.
Some folks would say that. Weirdly, I know that some folks are very insistent that God and even the Spirit is male, but then out of the other side, here on Earth, they link gender to genitalia. So I don't know how that works with the spirit, but
Right.
it works for Jesus, I guess.
Yeah, you can do that with the Son. I don't know. I mean, other than this, just the title Father, I guess it sort of implies manness. But the Spirit in the Old Testament, in particular, I'm pretty sure it's a feminine noun that's used.
Yeah, that was actually, and I'm sure this is going to sound heretical, but if you've already listened to our Trinitarian podcast, this should not surprise you. But that's how actually I was able for a long time to kind of conceptualize the idea of a Trinity, because I was like, well, there's a father and a son. For that to exist, there has to be a mother.
Right.
So there's a father and a mother and a son. Of course, there's three.
Yeah.
There has to be.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. The Trinity, something that I've become just more and more aware of lately is just my complete lack of education, just real ignorance in the truest definition of the word.
Uninformed.
Just completely uneducated on so much of this, and just there's so much more for me to learn before, but here we are. We just keep talking anyway. But and that's fine. I mean, it's, if nothing else, what this is just documenting our process of learning and unlearning and relearning and all that. So
Really, yeah. I mean, that is for me what it is. That's why I think we've made it abundantly clear many times that we're not scholars. I mean, that's not the hope, but we're not here to educate anybody. From at least I'm not. You know, most of the time I'm here working out my own issues.
Yeah.
For the world, I'm using the world as my therapist. So,
yeah.
So to that commenter, maybe you're right. Who knows where I'll end up? But
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't see myself going back that way, but, whatever. Who knows?
I don't either, unless I become smart enough to figure out how the Earth could create itself out of nothing.
Right.
Let's see. Everything seems to hinge on that.
Yeah, yeah. Even then, yeah, I don't know. Even then, I don't know that it would entirely exclude the possibility of there being a God. But yeah.
Oh, I'm not saying it would definitively, but that
Yeah.
would be in order for that to be a possibility for me, that building block has to fall.
Right. But yeah, that's I don't know. I really just have become just more and more convinced. The more I learn about these different voices in the tradition, and like how they're just all the stuff that we struggle with today, man, they've already talked about it and disagreed about it, and then talked about it more and disagreed some more about it, and then like it's just there's such a rich history of the church wrestling with all these things,
Right.
that like it would, for me anyway, I would be it. I don't think that it's wise for me to move forward without consulting those voices on a lot of topics.
On that topic, I think that we kind of have a unique ability to look at some of that stuff because we're not beholden to a stream of tradition. We're not beholden to the Catholic Church. So I could care less what they have deemed a heresy.
Right.
So point being, it's like I can look back personally on those struggles, acknowledging that if I'm having struggles with something, somebody else in the past has to.
Yeah.
And I can look back at those, and I don't have to silence certain voices just because they were deemed heretical.
Right.
Because you know what I mean? So like that, I feel like it gives us a little bit of unique freedom as not being beholden to some of not that people within those traditions don't have that same freedom, but it depends on how comfortable you are with pushing the edges of your tradition. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I mean, just Protestantism in general kind of has that freedom.
Yeah.
Which makes it very interesting to me whenever folks that are Protestants try to argue against universalism from church history. It's kind of like, I mean, like the whole idea of Origen being condemned or universalism specifically being condemned at the Fifth Ecumenical Council. It's kind of like, well, I mean, first of all, I think we have really good reason to believe that that's just not the case. But even if it was, like, do you care? Like, why do you care? Like, why is that even something that you're trying to bring forth as evidence?
Right.
You know, and I've only heard that argument from people who, well, that's not true. I have heard people that from Orthodox or Catholic traditions say bring that same charge against the Universalists, but I've heard it from plenty of Protestants, and I just when you're a Protestant, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I do understand having a respect for church history, but I don't know that those councils hold like a lot of authority for you if you're a
Right.
Protestant.
I'm probably, and this is a theme that I've mentioned in several different episodes, but I always have a tendency to sort of retaliate equally as hard. You know what I mean? Maybe
Right.
I'll counter something by swinging equally the other direction as hard. So like I'm actually the complete opposite with some of that stuff. Like I'm very skeptical of church history just because of I understand some of the power dynamic involved and like some of the like looking back at like
Constantine changed everything.
Constantine and
Yeah.
how when it became a state religion and then all the power and money that became a part of the church and like it makes me question things even more. Like, is this really was this other thing deemed a heresy because it's actually a heresy or because it posed a risk to those in power?
Right.
Because it posed a risk to their wealth or their power. And
Right.
like so it makes me super skeptical. You know what I mean?
Well, that's super applicable to that Fifth Ecumenical Council because, like, there's so much controversy around there. Like, there's whether those anathemas were even part of the council or if they were, like, kind of added on. There's debate around that. There's debate about, like, from what I understand, the Pope at the time was imprisoned. Like, he didn't want to attend this council.
Yeah.
He didn't want to, and apparently, he was imprisoned. I'm trying to think of the emperor at that time, Justinian. Justinian had him imprisoned, and like all of a sudden he changed his tune. He was like, "All right, well, let's do it." Like
Right.
I mean, there's so many like just weird things that are like, and I can't remember the exact quote. I don't even know if I could find it, but I remember that supposedly Justinian said outright that like he didn't want anything other than Augustinian theology being taught.
Right.
Because of that reason, because he wanted to keep people in line. He wanted to keep people scared of hell. So, I mean, that's certainly like overly simplistic, but essentially, from what I understand, that played a factor in all of that, the surrounding that council.
Right.
And that's not the only one. To your point, like there's controversy surrounding a lot of these councils, and what's the motivation behind it, what isn't, and yeah, I mean, I mean, but you can also go too far and be overly skeptical of it too. So it's just, yeah.
Right. Which maybe, I mean, that's probably a valid argument for me. I probably do, but yeah, whatever.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, pre-Constantine, it probably wasn't as big of a, well, I do know, like, prior to the Nicene Creed, like, it was, well, even saying that is too simple. It's not taken seriously. What I was going to say is that it was a bit of a free-for-all prior to the Nicene Creed, as far as, like, what, the Nicene Creed, that's, we're establishing, this is what we mean by the faith once delivered, like this is what,
Yeah.
so like prior to that, it's a little bit of wild west situation, like it's kind of anything goes, but like not really. I mean, there was debate still. It's not like there was tons of debate about all of that. I mean, like the subordinationism and Arianism, that Arianism is just like a specific form of subordinationism, but like all of that is around prior to, there are things that are considered heresy later that are present before Constantine.
Right.
It's just they're not considered. But even then, these were in-house debates. It's kind of like how me and you, like, we're still buds. Like, we disagree on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But we still attend the same church, and we still are buds, and like it's kind of like that. I mean, some of them were not buds. Some of them really did, like.
I mean, I still
dislike each other.
still talk crap about you when you're not here, but that's kidding.
How dare you?
I do not.
Yeah, but yeah. So anyway, it was like I do wish that we could get back to that point where like we could agree to disagree and still
Yeah.
let's not try and burn each other at the stake.
I wonder if
You know?
it seems, I don't want to make it just a generalized statement here, so I'm just going to say it this way. It seems to me that that's a pretty uniquely Christian thing. Because I know that as some of my study looking into some of the other, world's religions, like I know within, like Buddhism, there's several different schools of Buddhism, and there's not an orthodox Buddhism. You know what I mean? They're like within Hindu, in Vedanta, there's like 6 or 8 schools of Vedanta. They all believe they're all based around the Upanishads and the holy text, the same holy text, but there's like 6 or 8 different schools of thought, like which are just the slight variations in thinking, but there's not one that's like this is the orthodox position. This is, you know what I mean? Like
Well,
it's
that's even really true in Christianity too, I think. Because like there's certain so like for example, there's specific things within the Catholic tradition
right,
that are specific to the Catholics, like that are authoritative to Catholics only.
right.
And and the Protestants have their own sort of like
Well, I think so. To your point, yes, there you could go it like denominationally within Christianity, but I guess the point I was making is that they don't have like a Catholic or Orthodox. You know what I mean? Like they're all seem to be. There are schools which are more popular, more prevalent, have more members or whatever, schools of thought, but there isn't like a Catholic faith. You know what I mean?
right. I guess I was just sort of equating the schools of thought to like Catholic is a school of thought, or Orthodox is a school of thought,
Right,
and
right.
Protestantism is a school of thought, and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, I mean, I was just what I was speaking on it from the perspective of heresies, right? Because who declares the heresy is just the Catholic Church, right, or the popes and the councils, and
well, so there are differences even there. I think though, as far as like what's considered heresy in Orthodox versus what's considered heresy in Catholic Church. I think there are differences in that, and what's considered heresy within Protestantism.
does Protestantism have heresy?
Well, I mean,
Who decides that?
I
I guess
don't.
each individual denomination or church has its own heresies.
I guess. I mean, I think that most of that seems to be more in the Reformed tradition, as far as like crying heresy from Protestants.
I need to get a T-shirt that says heretic on it. I feel like that would be fitting.
Uh, it has to have the picture of the guy from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure when they go back to the medieval time period. Heretics! They had fire in their eyes and they had horns. But like to the Orthodox, like a lot of Protestants, like penal substitution, the PSA, especially the particular form of PSA where like you're pitting the Father against the Son as a display of God's wrath and justice, like that is a heresy to the Orthodox
I
Church.
agree.
Exactly.
That's a heresy to me as well.
But that's like the gospel to a lot of Protestants, especially in that Reformed tradition. So like, there are different schools of thought even within Christianity is all I'm trying to say, I guess.
I feel you.
So
They're all wrong except for mine, though.
mm,
I'm going to be the only one sitting in heaven. And when I ask God, why am I the only one here? He's going to say, everybody else's theology was slightly off, but you're the one that had it right.
mm. Are you going to be like Thomas Aquinas and take, like he said, that we would take pleasure in the sight of the damned?
I'm going to peer over the guardrail and be like, nah, 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 boo.
A little hot down there, guys? Feels great up here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I already told you my criteria for heaven, and if those aren't there, I'm not going.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it depends, because if you believe that we have resurrected bodies, if they are bodies, and they're in some way bodies like we have bodies now, I guess there would be. But if you don't believe in like a physical resurrection, like some sort of like bodily existence, that heaven includes some sort of bodily existence, then
Out of luck.
SOL, dude.
Unfortunate. Well,
Mm.
anybody that's been there, let us know in the comments. Oh my word.
What's that movie? Wasn't there a movie based on that? Or like 10 Minutes in Heaven or something? There's like somebody died and
Oh yeah. I read a book about that, I think, one time.
I can't remember exactly what the
Back in
title
my
was.
evangelical days when I was a good old evangelical boy.
Oh no. Have you looked into near-death experiences very much?
No.
That's something that's probably worth looking into. It's pretty interesting. From what little bit I have looked into, it's pretty interesting stuff. But
It probably is worth looking into. I just haven't done it.
well, and so the one thing that's particularly interesting to me is that a lot of near-death experiences, it always seems to be, and I mean, you can make of this whatever you wanted to. You could take a more skeptical view of it, but like there does seem to be in a lot of these near-death experiences, um, people having like visions of some sort of afterlife experience of
Yeah.
living. But it's also interesting that a lot of them describe their experience in a way that's pretty universalistic.
Yeah.
Even ones that, even ones where the person their description of the experience is a hellish experience. Even in some of those stories, what that experience ends up becoming is more sounds more universalistic actually than eternal conscious torment.
That actually reminds me of a video I watched today. I almost sent it to you.
Oh yeah.
I didn't.
Hmm.
Because it was an Alex O'Connor, and I just knew if I sent it to you, you were going to judge me and be like, I knew you would be the kind of person that listens to Alex O'Connor.
I listen to him too. I like him.
I really like Alex O'Connor. But he was talking to a couple of dudes. One of them I didn't recognize, and the other guy was that guy that is all the time has videos of him at college campuses debating or
Oh, Cliff.
Cliff something.
Yeah, I can never remember how to pronounce his last name.
But
Yeah,
he
I know
was
what you're talking
the
about.
whole point. It was only like a 10-minute clip of the video, that I watched. But he basically Alex is like calling out how strange it seems to be that God's love and forgiveness is just ends at death. Like we
Yeah.
as Christians, we act like death is nothing. God is outside of time and space and that death isn't anything, but then we act like for whatever reason that things change when we die. And that's this, and he kind of brought up a couple of admittedly, he would even admit far-fetched scenarios, but he did so to prove a point of if I think the most kind of extreme example, knowing it's not realistic, but to prove a point, that he gave was like if my friend told me that he was going to be invited to church, and I just knew how gullible he was, and I knew that if he went to church, he would accept Jesus, so I killed him so that he would go to hell. Basically just making an example. To the whole point being that that guy's eternal fate was actually in the hands of the person that took his life, more so than it was even in God's or that person's. Like it doesn't make sense,
Right. Yeah. See, that's a clip. I'm pretty sure what you're talking about is a clip from a longer conversation where I think it was Cliff and his son both were talking to Alex.
I don't know who that other guy was. I'd never seen him, but it was two of them.
Yeah, it's Cliff and his son. I know I think they went on Alex's. Is it a podcast that he has?
Yeah, it's a podcast.
But anyway, it was like an interview and I watched the whole thing on YouTube before. I can't remember how it's pretty long. But I listened to the whole thing, and that was part of the discussion. And I really thought that like Cliff and I can't think of his son's name. I can't even think of his first name, and I can't pronounce their last name. But I thought that their responses to Alex on that particular point were just completely unsatisfying. And I actually think that Alex probably could have made an even stronger argument against that if he had wanted to.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I know what you're talking about though.
I
I've,
just
I've
thought
seen that.
it was a unique. What it made me think of was how like just differently we perceive things, because I actually 100% agree with Alex in the arguments. Like I
Yeah,
thought he had the better answers, but he's an atheist and I'm not. Like we work
right.
it out differently. You know what
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean? But
yeah.
like I think his point was better than the ones that the Christian people on his show made, you know, in that particular point, just because
Yeah.
that's why I can't get behind that model of like you're saved based upon what you have to believe the right things, and you have to believe it at the right time, because God forbid if it's an accident, what if you died today? Do you know where you would go? Like
Sure.
that stuff doesn't work for me anymore, because logically it doesn't make sense.
I see that hand. I see that hand.
I see that hand back there in the back.
With every eye closed and every head bowed. But everybody's looking around. Side-eyeing everybody. Yeah.
But I said that prayer probably, God dang, at least 300 times, I'd say.
300 of them. Dang. Was that all in 1 year?
Probably. Well, that one week
Age 7 was rough.
that 1 week of going to center break, and
Yeah.
that I talked about before, which is like the
Yeah.
spring break church camp thing that we did, just within that 1 week, there's no telling how many times I prayed the center prayer in that 1 week, every year, multiple times per day,
Yeah.
of like, just in case it didn't catch.
Right.
Say it again. What if my heart wasn't right? I thought it was, but what if it
Right.
wasn't?
What if I didn't really mean it?
Right.
What if he didn't hear me?
It all seems so ridiculous looking back on it now, but I mean, that's the way I
Yeah,
live.
yeah, it
That
really
was
is, yeah.
real. Like those were real days in my life.
Yeah, especially whenever you're a kid, man. Like, what else are you supposed to think? Like, you don't have in a lot of ways, you don't have the mental capacity to even, I don't know. I'm having a really hard time concentrating today for some reason. The words are just not coming to me.
It's
But
probably because
like,
it's so cold down here.
I am actually
I'm
really
literally
freezing.
shivering sitting
Yeah.
here.
But yeah, you just don't. I don't think you really have the capacity whenever you're a kid like that to even know what to do with the things that you're told, the things that are handed to you.
Right.
You know, I mean,
Well,
even people that are more inquisitive and ask the questions don't know what to do with them.
well, even I know, like, it got worse over time for me, because like, as far as the like, well, how did you know it worked or whatever? Well, like it's easy to say, well, like, are you seeing the fruit of the spirit in your life, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, but as a kid, it's easy for me, like that 1 week, to be like really into it, and then you go home the next week, you're still on fire for God, so you're still reading your Bible or whatever. But by the next week, you're kind of back to normal, and then
Right.
you go back the next year, and you're like, damn, that I prayed the prayer, but it must not have took, because I'm still the same old scumbag I was before I left.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So then you're like, well, I know. So now I know it didn't work. I got to do it again. Like, and then
Yeah.
that just adds anxiety to it, because you're like, well, I thought I did it right last year, but it didn't work. So I don't know. Like, you're looking for that evidence, or you're fed this stream of like, if you say this prayer, these are the things that are going to happen, and then you don't see that happen in your life. So you're like, and it probably is a little bit like, I'm somebody that's kind of hard on myself, right? So maybe I probably was really seeing some of those things in my life, but just I'm a harsh judge of myself. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about your childhood and how all those things shape you and like what you. Yeah, I don't know. It's just
it's just part of that study that I've been on for a long time about what makes you you. Like, it's just
right.
it's such a fascinating topic, even without even just looking at afterlife implications or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Just literally just looking at who you are and why you are the way that you are, and why you think the way you think and behave the way you do, and all those. To me, that's the most fascinating thing in the world. Like, the more
Right.
time I spend thinking about it, the more fascinating it becomes.
Yeah. And there's just so many things that factor into all that. Because like with me being raised Pentecostal, like I was just like always constantly aware of the supernatural and like the in a lot of ways. Like I actually heard Chris Green say this, and I thought it really resonated with me and like with my own experience. But like I feel like we had a way more fleshed out idea of who the devil was than we did of who God was growing up. Like that,
That's
like
actually a really good point.
as far as like how I'm remembering my upbringing anyway. Like I feel like I had a way better idea of who the devil was than I did who God was, and
Yeah.
and like I knew that God was good and loved me, and but that's it. Like I don't. But like, what does that mean? Like, what does it? What? And like we would have said that God is Trinity, but like, what does that mean? Like, there was no explanation of any of that. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
But I could tell you exactly. Like, well, Satan was a fallen angel named Lucifer, and he existed before he was created before humanity was created, and he had this specific thing that he was created to do, and he had something to do with music, and like like there's this whole like explanation as to who this Satan is,
Right.
and but not a lot of like explanation as to who God is.
The legend of Satan.
Right. But yeah,
Satan.
but like all those spiritual experiences as a kid certainly shaped me, and for better or for worse, and yeah, it's just interesting to think about some of that stuff. And I mean, there's nothing you can do about it now except for sort of like own it. And
Yeah, and I mean, even in judging some of your past experiences, you have to take into consideration sort of what you just said, that it's shaped you into who you are today. So without it, you wouldn't be the person that you are today. You would not be where you're at today without the experiences that you've experienced, And so with some of those, not that that's an unpleasant experience, but even with some of our unpleasant experiences, and that's not to gloss over true evil that happens to people, because it does, and that shouldn't. It should never happen.
right.
But even some of the more unpleasant experiences that we have, that we wish we could. That's why I think people all kind of know that, because, generally the kind of canned answer that people give is, well, I wouldn't go back and change anything, because if I do, like, we all acknowledge that if you changed anything in your past, you wouldn't be who you are today. So even some of those more painful experiences or more unpleasant experiences have helped us to become the person that we are.
Yeah. I don't think that it has to, though. It's like, I don't think we need those necessarily. I mean, I definitely know that it can seem that way from our perspective, but I think to say that we need the evils and the sufferings and the traumas, I didn't know we were going to get into this, actually.
I didn't either.
But
has nothing to do with what we'd planned on talking about.
and we've already talked about this some, but like I didn't say this on the pod, but like I do think that like when I've talked about in the past that like God's not done with your past any more than he's done with your future and your present. Like what I'm trying to say there, I think, is that unless we want to say that evil and suffering and trauma and pain has its origins in God or is necessary even for you to be created into the image of God that you're supposed to bear, even I don't see how we get around it either way. It seems to me that we're saying that evil and suffering and trauma and those pains, that those things are necessary for us or for God. And I just can't believe that. I can't believe that it's necessary for us or for God in our creation. Whether we're saying that like God creates you specifically or not, like even if it's just you, it would be really hard for me to imagine that you being you is dependent upon evil and suffering are necessary for that. So I do think that like it's very possible that where you, and there's the whole GPS analogy, right? The whole like, and the idea of like you having a you that you are uniquely created to be, and that those experiences that have brought us to this point, while they seem from our perspective to be necessary to get us to where we are, I think it's possible that those evils, those sufferings, the things that we've experienced can be made what they were always supposed to be, and it still result in us being who we were always meant to be, which isn't different than who you are. You know what I mean?
Maybe I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I do. I don't think I agree, but I also don't think I disagree.
Yeah.
In a weird way, because I agree on the point that God doesn't need evil or suffering.
I think we just can't say that.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. But I do think if you change anything about the past, about my past leading up to here, from the day I was born until this day, I'm not the person that the person that's sitting in this chair is fundamentally different than the person that is here today. But I think where the difference in what you're saying and what I'm saying is that you're saying who you were meant to be, which is like that finished product, right? I don't think none of us are that quote unquote that finished product yet. So does God need evil for you to embody who you were always meant to be? No. But is pain and suffering part of our past that put us sitting in these two chairs right now? Yes.
Right. And so I guess the only thing I'm saying that's different than that is that I think that it's very possible that you are currently, at least, who you're supposed to be right now.
Yeah.
You aren't the finished product yet, but you are who you are supposed to be right now. And the you that you are right now is still not dependent on that evil and suffering and the traumas and all of that.
Yeah, see, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the appeal to thinking like that, but I just don't know that it makes a lot of sense for me logically currently, with just lived experience.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what I say is, I mean, honestly, a lot of my theology is stuff that does, because I believe that the Gospels, like Jesus as he's portrayed in the scriptures, I really do think should, if we take it seriously, should cause us to question our reality. It should cause us to question what we deem to be true based on our lived experience. I really do think that it should call into question what we do and don't know to be true about time and space and pain and trauma and suffering and literally everything. And it's
yeah, I mean that's a hard one for me, just to be honest.
Yeah, I know.
Just because like I don't know how we ground anything. You know what I mean? Like if even our reality is completely upside down and backwards and nothing can be trusted, then I don't know how. Like I don't even know how we talk about anything. I don't like. To me, there has to be some ground in reality.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, yeah. But like some of this is even stuff that like we can kind of see an evolution of our understanding of our own experience throughout time, though. You know what I mean? Like the whole like Copernican shift thing. Like there was a time in which people would say it is my lived experience that like I can stand right here and I can see the sun go down and I can see the sun come up, and like yeah, you would have had a real hard time convincing someone back then that like no, that's actually us that's moving. Like
right.
But we know that to be true now, and there's a lot of things like that I think have evolved over time that like. Even from that level, even if we wanted to take theology completely out of it, even from that level, I think we have reason to suspect that maybe what we think to be true, it's possible that we could find in the future that we're just wrong about that. Like something that we just take for granted as a truism today. You know what I mean?
I mean, yes. I mean, it's a fair enough point. And
Some of the stuff with quantum
and
physics and all that.
yeah. I mean, it's a fair enough point. I mean, I guess the only thing that I would say to that is I think that the only thing that we have to go off of though is our lived experience. So I don't think that we can. While I think we can acknowledge that maybe because we don't have to acknowledge that maybe we don't know.
Yeah.
everything that there is to know.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? But I also don't think that we, or at least for me, I'm not comfortable making like assertions completely contrary to my lived experience just because maybe my lived experience is wrong. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Well, any of these assertions that I'm making they're just my opinions.
right.
It's what I believe. It's what my faith is, and it's what my hope is. My hope is that the things that have happened, that the evil and the suffering and the traumas, all of the things that have happened, not just in my own life, but the things that I've done that have brought pain and suffering on other people, and just everyone's pain and everyone's suffering, any evil that's been experienced in all of creation. Like, my hope and my faith is that those things that God is not powerless to do something about them.
Right.
That they are, in fact, able to be transformed, transfigured into something far more beautiful than we could ever imagine. Like, that is my hope, and that's what my faith is. Can I prove that to anybody? No, I can't.
Right.
And
Well,
that's why I say it's just my opinions, this is my beliefs, this is what I'm hoping and praying for and have faith in, you know.
And I mean, to a certain extent, I wouldn't even disagree, really. That's why I said what I said about, like, I disagree, but I kind of don't, but I kind of do, is because I mean, everything that you just said, yes. But that's kind of like if I was to go down that road, like, that's in the past when I'd spoke of, like, burning away the wood, hay, and stubble. That's sort of what I was talking about. You know what I mean? So, like, but I still think that you yourself are fundamentally different. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see there's any way around that. Like, you change those things. I don't see how it doesn't affect you. It doesn't change your person. Like, I think there has to be a fundamental change, and I don't see any other way around that for me.
And I understand that from our experience. I understand. I'm fully aware of what you're saying. Like, and I agree that it is hard to imagine, but I can't imagine it. It is hard to imagine, and when I say imagine, I mean imagine. I don't mean prove,
Yeah, for sure.
or explain in some way that is going to make a lot of sense. But I can't imagine it, and you know that it just reminds me of the scripture, like it, more than you could think or imagine, right? Like the he's able to do abundantly more than you can think or imagine.
But I mean, if it doesn't change you, then what's the purpose of any of it? Like, I don't.
Well, the purpose, I don't think it has a purpose.
No, I mean, I don't know, man. It just.
I mean,
I
it
don't.
really, because it depends on where you think the source of evil
Well,
is.
I'm not talking about the purpose of evil. I mean, like, the
Oh, okay.
purpose of, like, becoming who you're supposed to be, right? Like, if you believe there's a person that you're supposed to be, but when you change those things in the past and it doesn't make you more like you're supposed to be, like, that's I guess where it seems like to change those evils should have changed that part of you that needs to be redeemed or refined or resolved, right? Like, that's the unhealed part of you that needs to be taken care of. And in healing that past, that part of your person, who you are, is healed. That seems like that's part of us becoming who we should be, right? Who we're meant to be. But, like, it seems like if those things about those pains and sufferings are changed, but it doesn't fundamentally change something about you, then how am I ever healed? How am I ever made whole? How am I ever changed? Like, how, you know what I mean?
Not exactly.
Okay. It's fine.
Well, I mean, I like because
But I
think
mean, I'm just thinking,
I
like,
know what you're saying.
take you as you sit right now, and then
Right.
think, like, let's change every negative thing that has happened to you that caused you some sort of pain or suffering, but it's not going to change who you are today in any way. Well, then, like, what is what are you progressing towards, and what way are you ever changed as a person into the person that you're supposed to be?
Well, because those experiences are no longer painful experiences for me. The things, the sins that were committed against me and the sins that I committed, the ways in which I wasn't loved as someone else's neighbor,
Right.
and I haven't loved my neighbor as myself, those things are made into what they should be.
Yes. So, but aren't you saying that because they are no longer painful, sinful experiences and they're changed, that fundamentally changes you, refines you into what you should be, not what you are currently?
I mean, in a sense, yes.
Okay. Well, that's the tension I was getting at. I was like, I don't understand how, like, if I heal all these traumas, but it's not, because I'm not a healed person sitting here. I mean, I'm okay. You know what I mean? But I'm not perfect. I'm not in the fullness of what I should be sitting here. But if all of those, the reason why I'm not part of the reason, at least, has to factor in is because of those painful experiences and those traumas that I've experienced. So if those things are healed, would I not be a healed version of me instead of this broken version of me?
Yes, you would be a healed version of you, but
Okay.
that doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't be you. You would just be you healed.
Yes, that's all I meant.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's what I'm saying. I don't know that you being healed means that you are a completely different William Nathan Sutherland, other than those experiences are no longer what you've perceived them to be so far.
Yeah, but I still think that completely changes you fundamentally. You know, and it's a little bit harder to see for us, but I'm thinking about like serial killers.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like those people, you take that history and change it and heal that. Those are totally different people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's not. Again, it's not something that I can really explain all the mechanisms behind it, like how it worked, like the how of it.
right. Well, I don't even need to know the how of it now that you've explained that. That was kind of because I was like, well, I don't understand how we ever progress to being healed then. Like, how are we ever healed if resolving the things that broke us doesn't fix us, then what is? Like,
Right, and of course, all of that is gonna. There's so much that goes into all of that, which is like what is the origins of evil? How does evil find its way into our world? Like, is it solely based on us? Is there other forces at hand, like at play here? And yeah, there's so many things that go into all of that, and so yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot to consider with all of it.
I don't have the answer to it. I'm actually reading Tom Ward's book right now, the Uncontrolling Love of God. So
Yeah.
It's had me thinking a little bit on this stuff actually, which is kind of weird that we randomly got into it a little. But so far, he makes a good case. Which I mean, Tom always does. I enjoy listening to him on podcasts too, even though it's still some of the open relational theology stuff I don't necessarily understand and I'm sure he gets this a lot. It's just so outside what I've grew up understanding that it's hard to grasp. You're hard to wrap your mind around a little bit, you know. But so far, I mean, he hasn't actually talked a lot about it yet. I'm not reading as much as I need to, so it's pretty much he's just been setting up the problem. I haven't really got into a lot of the juicy deets yet.
Yeah. So, like, it is interesting, though, because I do think that given what we're talking about right now, with the evil and suffering and traumas and all of that, like, there are a lot of people who will find Tom Ward's position to be helpful,
yeah, for sure,
in that regard. But then there's some people that can't think of it that way, and it's just interesting how some people, like, I know that Jordan Daniel Wood has written a piece recently on trauma, and he takes that sort of like what I'm sort of parroting here, as far as like and it's all of that's sort of ultimately coming from like Maximus and Gregory, I think, but yeah, like, so. But it just depends on what resonates with you, because like I know that like one person had sort of Jordan was telling the story and said that like someone had reached out to him, or I think he had sent the essay or whatever, the article or whatever it was that he had written to multiple people, people that were victims, and he got mixed reviews. And I know that Tom has said that there's been multiple people that have found his view helpful in that too. So it's just interesting how, like, because to some people the idea, and I think a lot of it has to do with how far you've come in your own healing from those traumas. Like, if you're someone who's put a lot of work into trying to heal from these traumas, and just to think that, like, it would be undone entirely, can, to some people, be a saving grace, and to some people sound like hell.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it is kind of interesting in this particular topic how there are so many different ways. Like Tom so far in that book, just from what I've read, has laid out, I think, 6 different modes of thinking or method for this sort of tension between evil suffered on people and God's providence. Really, is just the way to say it. His interaction in the world, whether he causes it or prevents it or interjects into his time and space to control people or control elements or natural
Right.
laws, things like that. So there are so many different ways of seeing it, but when you try to think about it, does it even freaking matter? Like, it's whatever. It really is, to a certain extent, whatever resonates with you, because whatever helps you to wrestle with that problem the most. Because first of all, I don't know that we ever know that. We'll never find the answer out. We'll never know.
Right.
First of all, and if it resonates with you, it resonates with you. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything. I mean, I do think it's sort of in the same vein as what me and you have said before about our views of the afterlife, and like the things that we say about God do matter, and they do carry weight.
Yeah,
So
that was what I was thinking. That's the only way in which I think it matters.
So I think to a certain extent it matters, but I think the point for me, especially on this topic specifically, is that they each have their ups, they each have flaws.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's not like, in saying this, you're really saying something terrible about God that none of the others are saying. Like, they each have issues and they each have benefits. So
Right.
It's just whatever resonates with you. Like, to your point, some people who've lived experience makes some of those views unpalatable. They just can't live with it. Well, don't. Nobody's holding you to it. Like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I personally, I can't live or I can live, but I can't worship a God. I can't serve a God that I think controls everything, and yet there's death and destruction and cancer and
Right. Yeah.
people having to bury their kids. Like, I can't. If that's the case, then that God's, in my opinion, that God's not good, and I can't. I'm not going to worship that God.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, more recently, I'm actually the problem, the wrestling that this book has sort of made me wrestle with lately, and something, it's not new. We've talked about it before, but it's something that's kind of resurfaced again that I've been thinking through the last few days. It's just my thoughts on God interjecting himself to do quote unquote supernatural things, healing, miracles, things like that, like, and just the implications of, because I really struggle with that. I think it's especially because of my background, and because, like, that's something that our church really seems to have cooled out on a little bit, but for the last couple of years, they'd really kind of honed in on that. And I understand the desire for that, because, I've said before, if my son was to come down with some sort of disease, like, I would want to have the faith that I could pray to God and he's going to supernaturally heal him. I want to have that kind of faith or confidence that makes you feel, I don't know what the word is for it, but not secure, confident, hopeful, makes you feel hopeful.
Right. Yeah.
That you otherwise wouldn't have. But then if you think through the implications of that and think about all the parents that prayed to God to spare their baby and he didn't, and they had to bury their little baby, you know what I mean? Like that, I don't know that it solves more problems than it creates. You know what I mean? And so that's something that I'm really been thinking through a lot in the last few weeks and struggling with a little bit. When I say struggle, I mean real struggle, because I don't know what to think about it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not taking a solid stance either way. I just have real concerns and real questions and real tension.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and they're real. Yeah.
And even, I mean, there's just so many things that we say on that problem of evil that are just, because even I know when we talked about it before, one of the things is like, I know God doesn't cause evil, and I just know that that Jesus is suffering with those suffering. And on one hand, it's like, yeah, that sounds good, but I don't need if I'm suffering, I don't need somebody to suffer with me. I need somebody to stop the suffering. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's
Right. And that's where, honestly, that is where this idea that where I'm saying I don't think that God is done with your past. That's where that comes in for me. It does give me some hope and some it kind of softens the blow a little bit. Not that it's like it it's still incredibly tragic, like the amount of evil and suffering that is experienced every day, every single second. Like as we're recording this, there's just a tremendous amount of evil and suffering happening in the world. And so it doesn't negate it, but it does help me to live with it a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to that faith and that hope that what is happening right now, if it's not that, it's the the song, right? Joy in the morning. Like if it's not good, he's not done. And if there's anything even in our past, he's not done from my perspective. Like if you're anything that's not good in your past, he's not done. He can not just like, because a lot of people will think will agree that things will be good in the end, like I'm saying, but like they would say it from a perspective of like you'll just make peace with your horrid past. You'll see it in a light that is you're healed from it. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is like literally those experiences are not traumatic experiences anymore. They are good experiences. So like I don't know how else to even live with the problem of evil with aside from some sort of hope that like God is able to actually bring about goodness from them. Not like alter, alter our perception of them or we perceive them as good even though they weren't, but like actually make them good.
right. Well, I mean, uh, depending on, it doesn't say how, but the scriptures do say that all things work together for the good.
Yeah.
It doesn't say how they work together for good, so I'm not going to pretend to know that, but
Right.
that seems sort of fundamental to the faith is, we can't necessarily explain how, the who, what, when, where, how, or why even, but it's the faith that somehow it will work out for the good,
Yeah. Yeah.
whether that means a complete fundamental change in the past or some other thing, who knows, but
Yeah.
but I hear you. I guess it depends on how much authority you give scripture.
Which we still haven't gotten into. We're like an hour and a half into this thing.